mortals, I am the goddess who created the text world of Listernia, and I have succeeded in reading all 3 of the books on my August TBR. Now I know some people have done 12, 15, 20 books in a month, but for me, 3 books is just fine. The first book has been repeatedly recommended to me by my queen, Rachel Marie. And anyone who knows her knows what book this is going to be.
Middlegame. That is Middlegame is Middlegame.
Middlegame by Shannon McGuire. Now for some obvious, if you've read the book, reason, I kept calling this book Middlemarch in my head. But I picked up this book solely because of Rachel Marie's recommendations. She's the founder of the Book Junkie Trials, which I participated in, and when I was looking at her backlog of videos, she seemed to mention Middlegame in every one of her videos.
Middlegame. That is Middlegame is Middlegame.
Now this is one of those novels that could easily fit in multiple genres: fantasy, science fiction, horror. For me, I was getting more of a horror vibe. So that was the lens which I read the novel through. In fact, one of the reasons why I kept thinking horror is if I can quickly touch on another book mentioned in the novel, and this really tickled me because it's one of those classic science fiction authors who I really love, but I know very few people know about, and it's my favorite one of his novels called The Midwich Cuckoos by John Wyndham. And Wyndham was an early British science fiction author from the 50s. His other famous novel was Day of the Triffids, about sentient plants, which you may have heard of. I think it's inspired a Doctor Who episode or 2. Anyway, the plot of The Midwich Cuckoos is about an English town called Midwich, where everyone passes out in a perfect circle throughout the town. And when they wake up, all the women caught in this circumference that encompasses the town are pregnant, and they all give birth on the same day to golden-haired children. And cuckoos, of course, are birds who lay their eggs in the nests of other birds, so that the other bird raises the cuckoo, thinking it's its own baby. Anyway, I wanted to give a shout out to the Midwich Cuckoos, which was obviously an inspiration for Middlegame. And the Midwich Cuckoos was also made into a fabulous movie called Village of the Damned, which is one of my favorite black and white horror movies. It is really well done, and it follows the book pretty well. Now, I am talking about the black and white movie from the 60s. There is also a remake in the 90s, which was terrible.
Science fiction has never imagined so strange or terrifying a story as that of the village of Midwich, England, cut off from life as we know it by some mysterious force. And later, at one and the same time, a child was born to every woman in the village. Children that grew to look like this. Beautiful youngsters behind whose fiery, hypnotic eyes lurked the demon forces of another world.
Now, Middlegame opens on book 7, throwing you into the middle of a story, but then backpedals to book 0, and then moves forward from there. Normally, I'm not a fan of flash forwards, and I wasn't initially a fan of this one, but it makes sense later, and indeed may have been necessary for the story. Now, what a story it was. It is about alchemy, which is, in the novel, not a pseudoscience, but a blend of magic and science, culminating in the ability to create life itself. Now, the character of Asphodel Baker was a leading alchemist in the 1800s, and she was also the author of children's books. And she created a golem or homunculus or a Frankenstein called Mr. Reed, and he helped her on her quest to manifest the impossible city. 100 years later, we flash forward, Mr. Reed is still alive and striving to complete the work of his creator. And he created a pair of twins, a boy and a girl, and he separates them at birth. And the boy is talented in languages, and the girl is talented in math. And the story centers on how they find each other, what their relationship means, how they need each other to complete themselves, and how that attracts and at times repels them. And the relationship is thankfully strictly platonic, but it goes beyond a sibling relationship and enters into a spiritual realm that ultimately forms the mystery within this novel. Now, the pacing of the novel is fantastic, and I found myself drawn more and more into the story the more and more I read, until I reached the
point of no return,
which is that point in the novel that I find very difficult to put it down. And if I have to put it down, I can't wait to get back to it. Now, there are enough revelations and surprises that it kept me on my feet, yet there is enough foreshadow and backstory that everything makes sense. Now, I have to admit, I didn't think this novel was going to be as good as it was until I reached the halfway point into it. And then something clicked where I realized, well, this is going to be a great novel. So I get it. I get why people love this novel. I gave it 5 stars on Goodreads, and it certainly gets my blessing. The next novel I read was Dark Age by Pierce Brown. And if you saw my TBR, where I announced I was going to read it, I wasn't that psyched for it because I don't think the Iron Gold trilogy has a premise that is nearly as intriguing or as rich as the Red Rising trilogy. And my opinion doesn't change on that, because for me, a story about a revolution against tyranny led by a young man on a hero's quest, which is the Red Rising trilogy, that trumps the story of a veteran fighting to defend his home, which is basically what Iron Age is about. Now, I'll finally finish Dark Age, the second novel in the second trilogy. And holy heck, I feel like that dog that gets kicked by its owner over and over, but is still tragically loyal to the owner. That's how I feel after reading this book. It is a relentless heartbreak after heartbreak, tragedy upon tragedy, disaster upon disaster. And characters you've grown to love or enjoy just get brutalized. And I just felt exhausted after this novel. Now, I know this is the second book in a trilogy, so because it's the second book, you can't have a satisfactory conclusion. You know, that has to wait for the third book. Now, it's been a while since I've read the previous novel, Iron Gold, so I kind of forgot how amazing the actual writing is. The syntax and the use of language, I mean, it should be overwrought. And in any lesser writer, this writing would feel pretentious, but somehow Pierce Brown makes it work. Somehow the almost purple prose lends itself into the immersion that the main character, Darrow, aka the Reaper, is a tragic Greek hero. And the other main POV characters include Ephraim, the rogue who kidnaps Darrow's son and is trying to redeem himself, and Lysander, the son of the fallen empress who seeks to bring back the empire and bring down the Republic. And there's a few other POV characters, notably the Sovereign, Darrow's wife in Lyria, who has an interesting little twist in her storyline. The pacing is mad fast, and I found myself, again, this is one of those books where I hit the
point of no return,
where I found it very difficult to put it down, but you know, you have to sleep and go to work. So I think Pierce Brown has a true talent for battle sequences. There are also some genuinely funny scenes, usually the punchline coming right at the end of the chapter. And I thought that was very clever, very well done when he did it. Now, what I did not like was the ultra violence. I felt it was a little over the top. Now, I'm one that's usually not fazed by blood and gore in writing, but even for me, this was a lot. I also wish I didn't feel so beaten down by the end of this novel. I'm not sure if that's a really valid criticism because, again, this is the second book, so any real conclusions happen in the third, but I just felt so beaten down by this novel. And the other thing that I'm sort of beginning to question is, what is the moral of this story? What is the morality of the author or these novels? It kind of feels like it's one of those messages where everyone is terrible. Like even the common man and common woman are shown to be as corrupt and ignorant and base as those who fight for fascism. Sometimes it almost feels like there's no good guys and no bad guys, which I love shades of gray, but sometimes too much gray just gets muddy. Anyway, I am reserving judgment until the last book. I gave it 4 stars on Goodreads for the writing and pacing and master storytelling, despite the fact that it didn't feel great at the end. I'm looking forward to the end of this trilogy, but I have some very high expectations, and I will not be happy if the finale leaves me feeling like a beaten dog rather than being uplifted. All in all, this novel gets my blessing. The final book I read was really hyped in the bookish community, and I was really psyched to read it because the premise sounded like something I would really enjoy. Unfortunately, this may be a case where my expectations were way too high. The novel is Scythe by Neil Shusterman. The first thing, this is a dystopian novel. And what a dystopian novel needs to do for me is convince me that this broken society could possibly exist by extrapolating some flaw in our current society. Now, if it fails to convince me that this society could possibly exist, that's kind of a red flag. George Orwell's 1984 extrapolated what a totalitarian state could become. Huxley's Brave New World extrapolated what a commercial, industrial, soulless society could become. And even Suzanne Collins' Hunger Games extrapolated what an extremely bifurcated class system could ultimately become. I'm having a lot of trouble buying into the premise of this dystopian world in Scythe, where nobody dies, so a group of Scythes, or an elegy of Scythes, must decide who should die and who should not in order to control overpopulation. It sounded like a high concept idea that brought to mind Logan's Run or Harry Harrison's Make Room, which was made into the movie Soylent Green, which I'm sure you've heard of.
What is the secret of Soylent Green?
So I was really excited to start this novel, especially from all the hype in the bookish community. But right from the start, the huge question that sprung to mind and which sort of haunted the entire novel for me was, why are these immortals reproducing like they are? It's introduced right away that people have families, maybe even multiple families. They have multiple children. So obviously there's going to be population issues. It doesn't take a mathematician to figure it out if no one dies and people keep reproducing. How simple would it have been to simply glean people or kill people who have children, and those who don't have children, who choose not to have children, get the immortality? Or every time you have a children, maybe it increases the chance that you'll be called. Now it's introduced that immortals are bored and they have trouble finding meaning in their lives, so maybe having children is the only way to find meaning? If so, it isn't really explained, and more importantly, it isn't shown among the families we do see. So throughout the entire novel, I kept thinking that this was going to be answered. Why is it this society of immortals keep reproducing like rabbits to the point where they need skies to begin with? There are a couple other logical issues that made the Skydom a little ridiculous to me, but I don't want to give any spoilers, and it really wasn't as much of a distraction as this main question was. Anyway, I did like the main characters. Citra and Rowan is a girl and boy who have been chosen to become apprentices to a Scythe. Their relationship was fun to watch unfold, and I especially appreciated their character arcs. And the pacing of the novel was decent, though I felt that sometimes the main characters overcame their obstacles a little too easily. Strangely, I thought it would have been more effective if the main characters suffered more, which is usually the opposite reaction I have when reading a dystopian novel. Now, I don't hate the novel. There's a lot going for it, especially with the characters and the character development. I just wish I could have believed this world was possible instead of constantly thinking, why are these people so stupid?
For the smartest guy in the world, you're pretty dumb sometimes.
So for Scythe itself, I'm going to have the zapped book. It is not recommended. However, I have bought the sequel, Thunderhead. I bought it at the same time that I bought Scythe. So I'm going to read the sequel next month. And some people have told me that it's a better novel. Thunderhead is a better novel than Scythe. So I'm going to see where that takes me. Now I'll have affiliate links below to all 3 of these books. And if you've already read them, let me know in the comments what you thought of them. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree? Now, I know a lot of you are going to disagree with my opinion of Scythe, and that is perfectly fine. So until next time, may all the books you read be blessed.